Okay, now let's get back to some theory and understand how the poll for the consumer works. So Kafka consumers, they have a poll model. That means that basically they will ask data from Kafka. Other many messaging buses and enterprises, they have a push model. So that means that the server pushes data to the consumer and the consumer waits. So basically, the poll model was a decision that the Kafka guys made to allow consumers to control how fast they wanted to consume in the log, where they wanted to consume, and also give them the ability to replay events when they wanted. So overall, here's what it looks like. We have our consumer and our broker, and they're talking to one another. So the consumer does .poll and provides a duration for a timeout. And the broker basically returns data immediately if possible, or returns empty after a timeout. And this is how the poll request works. Now, the behavior can be controlled in many different ways. First, you can say how many bytes in minimum you want. By default, it's 1. And basically, if you increase that number, you get improved throughput because you say, I don't want Kafka to give me anything unless I got maybe 100 kilobytes. And basically, that helps decrease the number of requests. Overall, what did that cost you maybe is a bit of a latency sometimes. So overall, the default of 1 is fine, but you need to know about this setting. Now, there's another setting called max poll records. And this one is 500 by default. And that controls how many messages are received in each poll request. You need to increase that if your messages are very small and you have a lot of available memory or RAM, and you want to consume a lot of messages at the same time. It's good to monitor overall how many records you're polled per request, and if you feel like you get 500 records all the time per poll request, then it may be worth to increase it to get better throughput. Another setting is called max partitions fetch bytes, and by default it's 1 megabyte. This is basically the maximum data returned by the broker per partition. So if you reach from 100 partitions, you'll need a lot of memory because you have to allocate a lot of 100 megabytes in RAM. There's another setting called fetch max bytes, and this one is 50 megabytes, which is the maximum data returned for each fetch request, and that fetch request covers multiple partitions. And so basically, the consumer, when it consumes, it will perform multiple fetches in parallel, and this is how you reach that limit. So all these settings I showed you right now are default and they're just fine, and I don't recommend you touching them unless your consumer starts to max out on performance or throughput and you feel like you could optimize them using these 4 most important settings. So this was just a theory lecture. We're not going to do any hands-on on this because I'm not changing these settings by default, but they're here for you to know based on your need in the future. If you need to increase your throughputs or control how your consumers consume data, then they're here for you to understand how they work. So I hope that helps, and I will see you in the next lecture.